Get started. It's 2 minutes after 6 p.m. I am Esther McBain, one of the regional superintendents at Portland Public Schools. And on behalf of the leadership here at Portland Public Schools, I do want to welcome our Southeast Guiding Coalition members to our final meeting in the series of Phase 1 meetings designed to determine the feeder pattern for Kellogg Middle School. Our congratulations are in order. It is such a good feeling to have light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you all for your staying power throughout this complex process. Thank you also to our partners, Flow Analytics, for continuing to work alongside us as we try to come to reasonable conclusions. From the very beginning, at our very first meeting, which took place on the 10th of September, oh, that seems like such a long time ago now, we stated that the charge would be a multi-tiered process and that phase 1 will culminate with a recommendation to the deputy superintendent as to how we do want to populate Kellogg Middle School. On the 3rd of December, we refocused our meetings and reset. On the 10th of December, we looked at using the RESG lens to norm and refine the different options. We were able to coalesce around option C. Tonight, we will focus on reaching group agreements. And one of the many ways that we plan to do this is by having some of our volunteers speak to the recommendations they have made. Next slide, please. In staying in concert with our plan, we're going to review and finalize phase 1 recommendations tonight. We are going to capture priorities for phase 2. So if anything resonates with you that should be in phase 2, please make a note. Our note takers will capture all those notes and put them together so that in the spring, when we visit phase 2, we will be able to look at some of the suggestions and recommendations that have issued. We will also reflect on the process and conclude phase 1, hopefully tonight. Next slide, please. Our group agreements have stayed the same. We do expect and want you to please stay engaged. It is again our final night. We're very excited. So it is a rush to the finish line. We want you to please speak your truth responsibly. We do understand that we all have our pet peeves and our desires, but we also love the fact that all through this process, you have all managed to prioritize the community and the needs of our students, while also ensuring that the charge for this process stays front and center. So thank you. Please speak your truth responsibly tonight. We want you to listen, to understand, and to believe. This is a joint process. This is a collaborative process. This is a process that has allowed us to listen to many voices of our different stakeholder groups, our BIPOC families, our students, and our staff. So we want you to continue to stay open-minded through the end of the process tonight. Be willing to do things a little bit differently and experience discomfort. Anytime we have complexities that have to be resolved, there will definitely be a sense of loss, a sense of experience and discomfort, a sense of wishing things were a certain way. We just need to trust the process. We need to be willing to at least listen to what others have to share, and also be willing to look at different perspectives through different lenses. Expect and accept non-closure. That is one of the byproducts of a collaborative process. Some people will not get the closure that they expect, but we expect that as adults, centering our kids and looking at our RESG initiatives, that we can move ahead and come to some consensus. Next slide, please. So like I said earlier, December 3rd, we reset and refocused. We began working on the Kellogg options. This is of course following the open house event that we had on the 29th of November. And then on the 10th of December, we narrowed and refined the Kellogg options using our RESG lens. That allowed us to all coalesce around option C. And tonight, we're going to look at our group agreements and hopefully finalize our recommendations to the school board. Next slide, please. Our agenda tonight is, of course, we're going to be looking at our meeting objectives and the agenda review. We're going to come to a consensus model for phase one recommendation. We will have our presentation of phase one recommendation and phase two priorities. This will be delivered by the volunteers who worked through this process for us. I want to thank them ahead of time for their investment in time and effort. At 6:30, we'll go into a breakout session. In this breakout session, we will look at what can we support in the recommendation, what we would like to change, and what suggestions will we have for phase two priorities. For now, we're just going to capture those, and then in the spring, we'll revisit them. At 7:30, we'll have a breakout report out session. At 7:45, we'll take a break. At 8 o'clock, we'll have a group agreement and phase five consensus check. At 8:30, we'll have a phase one reflection and close out. At the end of the night, we will also hear from Director Scott Bailey, who will help us wrap up the process. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Esther.
Sure.
So as Esther mentioned, we have a lot of work that we need to get done tonight. I want to make sure that we're really honoring all of the hard work and the effort and the continued collaboration that we've had together over a long period of time. And so we want to talk specifically about how we think we can get to some group agreement to be able to get to the ultimate recommendation for phase one. So as Esther mentioned, we have 4 fabulous Southeast Guiding Coalition members who volunteered to help, to really help massage and sort of like get to the next level of detail about a recommendation. So our volunteer coalition members collaborated with staff and have spent quite a bit of time not only preparing for tonight, so what they're going to present to you, but also in working with PPS staff members to be able to really work out a lot of what they've heard from the conversations here. Tonight, we in the work of the volunteers have done, that the volunteers have collected around a recommendation. We're going to still allow for some changes, some modifications. We know that this is a group with really good ideas and that you have lots of ways that we can kind of try to make sure that we're still trying to iterate to be able to get to the best possible recommendation. And so we really want to honor and respect your abilities to iterate and to do that. And so we'll, after the proposal is discussed, we'll talk about in your small groups how we can sort of get to some additional changes as needed. We're going to continue to use that fist to 5 process to sort of get a sense of the room, to sort of see if we have a consensus. We're going to try to get to consensus, but at the same time, we may do a vote to sort of get us over the hump there. We will, as you know, as Esther just said, the version from tonight, the recommendation from tonight will go to the deputy superintendent, and the Board of Education will have a chance to review that in January. And Director Bailey, some of you may have heard him as we were starting the meeting. Director Bailey is here and will be continuing to be that conduit between this coalition and the rest of the board. So as we go to the next slide, I want to just do a quick review of consensus approach, because ultimately the decision making that's happening here in this group, we want to be really clear about that. So in our last meeting, if you'll recall, we had a chance to really sort of test the consensus building. We used the fist to 5 approach, where we asked you to give us your feedback using that fist to 5 5 being, I love it, I'm a champion of it. 4 being like, I think it's fine, no changes. 3 being, there's some changes I could see making, but we can resolve those later. 2, 1, and 0 being a place where we're going to kind of focus in and see if there is a lack of consensus. We're going to ask you if you see a major issue that needs to be resolved right away, or if you're at the point where you would want to block this. We're going to ask you, if you vote that way, to kind of bring that into the group to tell us what specifically might be changed. And so we're going to try to get that resolved and see if we can make some changes. The final recommendation, if we're unable to get to consensus, if we still have several folks who are in the 0 to 1 range, we may have to pivot to be able to get a final recommendation where we may use a majority rule for voting. So I want to be really clear and open that after your small groups and our discussion, we are going to try to adhere to the consensus approach, but we are going to have to kind of, as staff, really read what's going on in the room and try to get to a recommendation. My hope is that we can get there through consensus, but we may have to do that through a majority vote. So what I'd like to do now is to turn it over to our 4 volunteer members. Andy, Sarah, Dee, and Beth have spent some time with us, and they're going to go in depth and present the proposal for your consideration. We're going to go through those slides, and then we'll come back and tell you about what you'll be discussing in your small groups. So I think I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Andy, you're up first.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Andy. I'm a parent of 2 second graders in the Bridger neighborhood program. And as Danny said, was one of actually 5 coalition members who volunteered along with, Beth C, Dee, Min, and Sarah helped with some of this thinking to basically take the conversation from last week, the conversation that's happened on Discord since then, some of the feedback we've gotten from community members since then, and sort of pull that all together into a version of option C that could be a draft recommendation we could move forward to the deputy superintendent and ultimately the board. And we didn't make any decisions as part of working on this. We weren't trying to insert our own judgment or anything like that. What we were trying to do was just summarize as clearly as possible what's in the recommendation and the implications. And the goal here in that document that was in your packet and this presentation we're going to walk you through, it's not to convince you to be for or against this option or anything like that. It's just to try to explain what's in this and what are the implications to try to inform our conversations tonight. One thing we tried to do, though, and we'll get into this more over the next few minutes, is really focus on the why behind some of what's in here. I think that's something that's gotten lost at times, sort of in the weeds of the million proposals floating around and the pages and pages of data. One thing I feel like I hear people say almost every meeting is how uncomfortable it sometimes feels to feel like we're sort of moving pieces around on a chessboard or something like that. When in reality, what we're doing is making decisions that affect students, affect families, affect communities, affect educators who are working so hard every day to help our kids through this crisis academically, socially, emotionally. And so, the feeder pattern you see reflected in this option didn't just drop out of the sky, right? It was the result of a lot of really careful thinking from a lot of people about how we can get to the best and the most equitable result. And so whether you agree with the way that we tried to articulate that why, or whether you agree that this proposal is the best way to do that or not, we're hoping that sort of that'll help ground some of our conversations tonight, especially in the small groups, in what we're trying to accomplish here, and also where we're doing that, where we're falling short, and where we can make further improvements. I guess last thing I'd say, more of a personal reflection, I guess, I think working through this process just reinforced for me that, this option that we're considering, even though it got pretty far toward getting some consensus last week, it has some problems, right? But so does every option that we've considered in this process. And so does every option that we will consider in the future in this process. It's just sort of the reality of trying to balance so many competing considerations that are so often in tension with each other. And especially because just circumstances have forced us to sort of split this up into two phases. You know, there's only so much we can accomplish through a Kellogg feeder pattern. That's going to create some issues that we're not going to be able to resolve until phase two. And that naming that doesn't make that any easier for communities that might be affected by some of those problems. Doesn't make it any easier for us to say, you know, trust us, we're gonna prioritize those and get to those in phase two. But I think it's important to name that, and to we'll get to that in a few minutes, and to make sure we honor the commitments we make to prioritize those sort of pieces that we need to go back and address in phase two. And then at the same time, last thing, you know, this proposal would also do a lot of good, right? It would, it's just one piece of the sort of getting to the equity across Southeast of opportunity that we all want. But it would provide a middle school option for hundreds of students across Southeast who've been waiting for one for a long time. And in particular, for a lot of BIPOC students from low-income families who we've tried to center in this process. And I think that's something that is important to consider in our conversations too. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who's going to remind us what exactly is in this proposal. Which is on the next slide.
Unmuting helps. Hi, I'm Sarah. I am an Arleta parent. I've got a 6th grader currently. And so what I'm here to do is just kind of walk us through some really basic introductory stuff to get us started before we dig into the meatier stuff. And so you can see here, we've got a graphic showing what schools and programs would feed to Kellogg next year, which is fall 21-22, under this recommendation. 3 neighborhood schools, Arleta, Marysville, and Lent, along with 3 Spanish DLI programs from Atkinson, Lent, and Bridger, which are, you can see, are now represented by little stacks of books. And we can give people as much time to look at that as they like, but I'm ready for the next slide whenever. So next, we wanted to share some actual timeline details because there's been, you know, a fair amount of worry and questioning around that. So we wanted to lay that out. So we want to make clear what under this recommendation would change for the 21-21 school year and what won't. So this next fall, 21-22, Arleta, Marysville, and Lent neighborhood schools will be converting from K-8s to K-5s, and they're going to feed to Kellogg Middle School. In addition to those neighborhood feeders, the Lent, Bridger, and Atkinson Spanish DLI programs will also then transfer into Kellogg. And that is what would be changing first up this next fall. And I am ready anytime. So this next slide is showing everyone what won't be changing in fall of 21-22. These are outstanding changes that will still need to be addressed and decided and worked on in the phase 2 portion of our work and then implemented. Creston will remain a K-8 for 1 additional year, but will have a confirmed feeder path and become a K-5 in fall of 22. Harrison Park will also remain a K-8 for 1 more year, and then we'll be deciding its feeder schools in phase 2, which also, for now, Atkinson's neighborhood program will also just remain a feeder for Mount Tabor Middle School as it currently is. And that is most of that. All K-5 DLI programs, other than the ones that have been allotted to transfer into Kellogg in 21, will remain unchanged, as will all the K-5 boundaries, because that'll all be stuff that we'll address in phase 2. And then I believe, am I turning it over to Andy again or Beth? Or D?
It's D.
D.
In the next 2 slides, we're just trying to summarize to the best of our recollection from the group notes from last week what priorities are being addressed and what the glaring sort of priorities are that are not going to be addressed through this phase. So we are accomplishing partially converting K-8s to middle school assignments for 3 of the 6 schools in the cluster, Lentz, Marysville, and Arleta. And they were prioritized because of their notably high percentage of BIPOC and lower income students. The initial Kellogg enrollment is below the 80% utilization rate, which leaves room to add additional schools during phase 2, absorb growth that is typical with new school openings, and also to be able to add special education classrooms as needed. Phase 1 will also alleviate the overcrowding at Bridger and allow the kindergarten program to return to join the main school program. It consolidates outer Southeast 6 through 8 Spanish DLI programs near the highest concentration of native Spanish speakers and creates consistency in staffing and programming, which hopefully will promote the efficacy of the programs in the upper grades. And it leaves open a full range of phase 2 options to robustly enroll Harrison Park Middle School, reduce overcrowding at Franklin High School, and adjust boundary and assignments to balance enrollment all across Southeast in phase 2. We're ready for the next slide. And then the biggest sort of glaring deferred decisions in phase 2 are delays K-5 conversion for Creston. There's no location specified for the Chinese DLI programs, and Atkinson is left with a split feeder. And then there's also an interim issue with the Bridger Neighborhood Middle School not having an assignment for the upcoming year. And we wanted to take a minute and let the folks in the coalition who are directly related to these issues have a minute to speak. So Beth, Brett, if you wouldn't mind attacking the first one, the delay of the conversion of K-5 to Creston for us.
Sure. Thanks for letting me speak. So I think the Creston community is really challenged with the reasoning behind this when it is stated that diversity is a primary point of this coalition, and then to state that Arleta, Marysville, and Lent were prioritized over Creston because of our diversity. I think we all need to look back and understand it's really about location. The margin between Arleta and Creston's diversity is negligible. Not that they're negligible, but the difference is really not that drastic. And so this really is about location. The biggest concern for Creston, we have 2. One is that we remain a K-8 when everyone around us is changing to a K-5, thereby reducing the resources that Creston Middle School students will receive. And then the unknown part of where Creston will go. When we look at phase 2 and we are confronted with 2 middle schools, Hosford and then Kellogg, both of them, if Creston were to go, will be far exceed the enrollment numbers that each school can have. And so then our community will be divided. So we are losing our community in 2022, and in 2021, we are behind in our resources and support, thereby asking PPS to fund resources for an additional year for Creston, knowing full well that one of their middle schools is far underenrolled, and that is going to also cost additional money. So there are many issues that Creston is trying to bring to the table, and we wanted to bring that discussion tonight, and also make sure that the neighborhood schools are heard from as equally as the DLI schools. So thank you.
Thank you, Beth. And then I wanted to invite Min to talk about the issues in this recommendation for the Chinese DLI program.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Dee. So I know there have been so many discussions about the DOIs, and too much that people have gotten really, really tired of, and including myself. And in those discussions and excessive discussions makes representative from neighborhood schools feels that they're not getting the attention that they deserve in this process. And I wanted to say that neighborhood schools are just important as any other schools. I know I haven't said much before, but I wanted everybody to know that. And this has been a pretty painful process for me, because there's so much misunderstanding about the DOI programs and the DOI programs concerns and needs. And the worst of the worst to me, it is really the dominant white members who don't have kids in the DOI programs have been telling the DOI community or the BIPOC community what is best for their programs and what is best for their community. Well, they don't have any idea, and they refuse to truly listen to the voice of those communities, DOI communities and BIPOC communities through their representatives. And this is why a few BIPOC family representatives have left this process and just feeling frustrated, hurt, and pointless. And I feel the same way. I almost walked away too. But I didn't, because who would it be voice the concerns of our Chinese community in the DI program? When most of them who don't speak English were shut out of this process, not knowing what's going on and cannot provide feedbacks. And even when the feedbacks were finally provided through the focus group and open house, and it was selectively, not truthfully interpreted in the summary report of the community engagement last month. Now, well, thank you for the time for letting me get it out, because I wanted to share why this is being so frustrating. But now talking about the Chinese program, the UI program. So it is the proposal to move it out of Hosford. I know it's not written yet, but that's the notion to move out of Hosford. It has stirred up really deep concerns in the Chinese community. And the Chinese DOI program the whole community has worked so hard for many years and gone through many years of pain, of growth. And it finally became successful and robust. And it benefited so many students in the program and bridged the gap, academic gap for the community, which is what the DOI program is tended to do. Now, because we need to make a room for Creston to go into Hosford, that's what's mentioned many times. So we have to move it out, although Creston communities wanted to stay in Kellogg. Now, I mean, understanding that the work it's for all the students having to have a comprehensive, a robust middle school experience. And we get that, okay, things need to change. So while if we have to move, then can we move to somewhere actually be most accessible for all the families in the DOI program? And then we were told, no, you cannot. Because we need to increase Harrison Park enrollment, which to me, I don't know where is the interest of really the Chinese DOI program, and it's just to me, like the value of it is basically to bring up the enrollment in under-enrolled schools. And so I don't understand in that why that proposal, I mean, how does it show that it's for the benefit of all the students? And we have gone through a lot of changes for the program, and we also have to locate it far, the middle school that's far from most of Chinese families in the Woodstock and Hosford community. So these are really, really the concerns that I participated in the small volunteer group, and I wanted to say that not that I agree with option C, and I participated in that group to kind of understand and turn out that the document that we worked on, it is the recommendation, which I mean, I didn't have any idea, but well, I'm glad I'm part of it and did a little bit, worked a little bit on the transportation analysis, which I kind of, the reason I wanted to do that, because I wanted to see what's the impact for Chinese, for the DI communities. However, we don't have the data because it's so rushed. We can't get the data. But anyway, I mean, I appreciate the work that other members have done. All the conversations happened and put it together for the recommendation. But I feel option C is way far from complete or ideal? Thank you.
Min, thank you for sharing that. We really appreciate your point of view. Also wanted to invite Andrew Harvey to chat a little bit about the split feeder result that is happening at Atkinson. He is not a representative from Atkinson, although he had a child that went there, but he has been vocal about some opinions about the split feeder, and we'd like to hear from you.
Thanks, Dee. And thanks a lot, Min. I appreciate that, what you just said. So my interest has been in what's best for students, and that sometimes gets lost when you're staring at a lot of metrics and a lot of numbers. It seems to me that we have a wonderful opportunity right now to do what's best for students, even though it may be hard and there may be conflicts involved in doing so. In that quest to do what's best for students, one of the things that I've been asking about is the impact of split feeder patterns on students. My initial thinking on that is that kids going from elementary school to middle school are at a very, very intense stage of their lives with hormones surging through their bodies. A certain level of insecurity happens, and I think that in middle school, a real question of self-esteem occurs. My understanding is that going to schools with cohorts, be it from their immersion program or the friends that they make in the schools and that are familiar to them, can help ease some of this and create a more comfortable situation as they start to discover who they are. In conversations on the chat that we've been having, I've heard other viewpoints, some of which make sense. And most of them, actually everyone has something important to say, and that's actually something I really appreciate about our group. But where I think we're lacking right now is probably guidance from the educational experts in the room about what is best for students. Is splitting a feeder pattern from an elementary school to a middle school best for students? Is that good for them? Can we be better? Can we do this better if in fact not splitting a feeder pattern makes more sense for the students? Can we do better? Does it make sense to split feeder patterns from middle schools to high schools, which could be one of the results that we're needing to address in phase 2? It says Atkinson here, but really the feeder pattern from Bridger is also being split by this decision. And there certainly were opportunities not to do that, which the coalition chose. This was not a point of major concern for some people of the coalition, and not to enough people where the option that we're considering today wasn't approved. So I guess as we think about this tonight, I'd like people to think about the impact of feeder patterns, and I would also ask that the district, as we move forward, provides some reference for us to consider from an educational as educational experts, so that we actually have the tools in our toolkit to make these decisions without guessing, because I know I'm not an expert and I need as much expert information as possible to help advance this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy and Min and Beth, for speaking up on behalf of your community. The last piece of the phase 1, which really isn't it's not a piece that's going to translate to phase 2, but there's a sort of tiny, and sorry, I didn't identify myself. I'm Dee, and I have kids in the 3rd and 5th grade programs at Bridger. So I just wanted to be transparent because I'm about to talk about Bridger. And so we have sort of an unusual circumstance with our neighborhood program that has become part of the work that we're going to be working on tonight. We are in need of a interim solution for our 6th through 9th graders for next year who are in the neighborhood program. If I'm not sure if anybody remembers, but phase 2 proposes the elimination of the neighborhood school at the Bridger location. And in theory, that class would be split geographically, potentially between 4 different middle schools, depending on what happens in phase 2. We would have kids that are on our northern border going to Roseway Heights, kids on our eastern border going to Harrison Park, kids on our western border going to Kellogg, and kids on our western border going to Mount Tabor, and kids on our southern border going to Kellogg. And this will be, whether or not we like it, we would have to adapt to it. And for kids who are in K-5, they'll have a chance to move to their new K-5 feeder with at least 1 year of transition time for the families and the children to become part of a new community. But this transition that the district is going through proposes a unique challenge to the middle school kids who could potentially move with just a few of their cohort to a much larger school. And so given the disadvantage that being in a K school already has, and the limited middle school experience that kids have who are in K-8s, this additional component of isolation creates undue hardship to these classes at Bridger currently, which is the current 5th, 6th, and 7th grade classes, which are more than 50% BIPOC and 50% free and reduced lunch. I think a conscientious use of the RESJ lens necessitates that we create an exception and choice for these families to either move with the DLI cohort to Kellogg or to choose Harrison Park if that location offers a convenience to their homes or to younger children. Just to be super clear, this is a temporary accommodation in light of the fact that unlike some of the other schools that remain unassigned, there isn't a clear neighborhood school choice for the Bridger community moving forward. And so we have to come up with kind of a one-off solution for these kids. And I just wanted to sort of convey some of the hardship that we've been experienced over the last 5 years. We currently are so overcrowded that our kindergarten classroom is on a separate campus at Holiday Annex. So families are having to drop at 2 locations, and anybody who's ever had a kindergartner, if you can imagine what it's like to drop your kid off and not be able to take them into the classroom or pick them up in a classroom, it's been a pretty difficult hardship for our community. We've been out of classrooms for a long time, and we've had some pretty drastic measures to adopt, such as having classes in the gym and additional portables. And so this, I want to just be really conscientious about separating this from any of the phase recommendations, because this has nothing to do with the permanent feeding pattern for any school or any kids. We just have a very small group of kids. It's about 60 in that combined class of 3 grades. And we'd like for them to be able to transition into middle school while the district transitions into middle school with a little bit of ease. And that's all I've got.
All right, well, I'll take us into the next slide. I'm Beth Kavanaugh, and I'm the parent of a 7th grader at Hosford. In the neighborhood program, I also have a 5th grader at Abernathy Elementary. And so this next section was thinking about, as we consider a phase 1 recommendation, these are what our thinking is going forward, a starting point for further work to be prioritized or further work that's prioritized in phase 2. So this is some of those things, some of the issues that have been discussed that have come to the top that we know will need to be top of mind as we're moving forward. So these include determining the middle school feeder assignment for Creston so that it converts to K-5 in fall of 2022. Providing a location for Harrison Park K-5 students upon the conversion of that Harrison Park building to a middle school in the fall of 2022. Establishing feeder patterns that support robust enrollment across all of our regional middle schools in Southeast. Addressing the overcrowding at Franklin High School. Considering DLI placement at the K-5 and high school levels. We're actually at all 3 levels, as we're really only talking about Kellogg Middle School in phase 1. Considering DLI placement to strengthen programs to serve Native speakers more equitably and complement the neighborhood programs. And addressing low enrollment at K-5 schools. So to accomplish these priorities, and as we move forward in our consensus building practice and decision-making practices through phase 2, we're going to need clear direction from PPS on several key points. So we've talked about the need to sort of generate a list of like, what are the things that we're going to really need guidance on and clear direction from PPS, things around specific enrollment targets, location criteria for focus programs, co-location questions that are still out there, maybe some of the split feeder stuff that Andrew was bringing up. So we've got some topics that we feel we need to hear more from some educational experts and the PPS staff on. Next slide. So just to wrap up, we wanted to bring your attention to some of the other materials that were provided. I'm not going to go into detail here, but in the packet that was provided this week, there's some information on additional implementation for phase 1 considerations, things around special education, continuum services, transportation, data about transfer students at Kellogg feeder schools, right to remain at Kellogg. There's also an appendix included that reviews some common phase 2 ideas that have come up so far as a starting point as we sort of follow some of these trails with whatever we end up recommending in phase 1. Where does that take us in phase 2? Sort of getting the ball rolling on some of those phase 2 conversations. Next slide. So the last thing that we wanted to draw your attention to, this I believe is not actually in the packet, but we thought it was a really valuable resource. So this will be available in the breakout rooms as you're having those discussions. What this table shows is the building blocks for potential Kellogg enrollment. So you see the furthest column over on the right is the estimate for option C. Some of these are updated, like you'll see a star next to Bridger, so that that takes into account the additional strand of Spanish immersion that is now at 6th grade, and the star down at the bottom refers to how that will continue to grow. So we're looking at actually 95 students by the fall of 2022 in that program as an estimate. But what this really allows you to do, it's a resource for considering modifications as you're thinking through potential changes that you might want to suggest to option C. You can look at these pieces and say, okay, if this particular school or program were added or taken away, what does that do to the enrollment numbers, and how does the balance start to look when we do those things? I think that brings me to the end of my portion.
Thank you, Beth. And thank you to all of our volunteers, our 5 volunteers, Min, Andy, Sarah, Dee, and Beth, for all the work that you did. And I really just want to also thank Beth Brett, Andrew Harvey, and Min for talking about some of the other considerations. So what we're going to do is you're going to have an hour in your breakout group. So at 6 from until 7:45, you're going to discuss in your groups what in the recommendation you are supportive of, what in the recommendation you would change or tinker with, and what would you add to the phase 2 priorities. So using the packet, your note takers and your facilitators and the flow staff in each of the breakout groups will have this information. We're asking you to be able to be prepared to come back and to speak to each of those questions. We'll be taking that information and compiling it so that we can get to our consensus building approach. Notice that we're also recommending that you spend at least 20 minutes on each prompt and try to give each prompt about equal time. So I know that sometimes it can be easy to go to what would you change, but we also want to sort of make sure that we're capturing what it is that you support. And also we want to make sure that we give adequate time to phase 2 and what those priorities are. So if you can try to, in your conversations, try to seek some balance in terms of the conversation, so you get a big, robust time. So Nathan the Fabulous is going to take us back into our 3 breakout groups. We will see you in an hour, and we look very much forward to the next phase. So thanks so much for doing this, and thanks again to our volunteers. I thought that was just so robust and really well thought out and well presented. So thank you, everyone. Everyone, looks like we have everyone back here. Welcome back. Thank you for what I am sure is a lot of really robust discussion and sort of like deliberation to get us to the sort of next phase that we're in. What we're going to do is we're going to take about 20 minutes. I'm going to ask the facilitators for each group to summarize your group's conversations. And then we're going to go to a break, and we're going to take a look at your notes as well as the summaries that you provided. And when we come back, we're going to give you some additional options for consensus building. So I'm going to go ahead and ask our facilitators to be ready. If you could summarize the high points of, in terms of the recommendation, what were your groups supportive of? What were some recommendations for specific changes? And what were phase 2 priorities that were listed? So we're going to go ahead and start with the, let's start with the Clackamas room. And so I believe that's Carl and Lisa.
All right. We had a great discussion. And I'm sure I'm going to miss something. So we'll just start with that. So we talked really quickly. I think there was a lot of agreement on some of the things that people support, keeping Kellogg at a still lower end of utilization to allow space, addressing Bridger's overcrowding, consolidating the Spanish DLI in a middle school program, at least achieving converting some K-8s to K-5s. I think people saw the low issue utilization gave some room to address Franklin overcrowding perhaps later on. And also potentially that Harrison Park could head to Kellogg at some point as well. So people liked seeing that there were still some options for phase 2 with how that was set. We talked about, we spent a lot of time talking about for things to change, of really trying to figure out what is a way for Creston to also change to a K-5 or not feel left out of the process. And so we talked about, could you include Creston at Kellogg? Is there room at Hosford? Is there ways to support Creston and Harrison Park so that middle school students don't feel like they're, even if they don't move to Kellogg, they're still getting the same middle school experience as Kellogg students in terms of electives and choice. And then I think one of the things that we talked a little about is where can we still provide choice? So knowing that this is disruptive, some communities it'll be, the Bridger community already navigates multiple locations and this will be another change. And so where can we also say, hey, be really clear on hey, here's also the hardship process if this is a hardship for your family or things like that. And then we had a lot of ideas to add for phase 2. We talked about having 2 DLI Spanish schools in Southeast, making sure that was a priority. Similarly, looking at Chinese DLI and what makes sense there. Making sure Creston and Harrison Park and Lane are addressed. We talked about, we were finishing up talking a little bit about this will lead to some really small K-5s and what does that look like moving forward? Making sure that schools don't also lose out when they're small K-5s. Carl, what am I missing?
Did good. I think I don't remember if you said allowing Atkinson DLI to have 2 options, to give them 2 possibilities for their DLI program. And then again, like I think you just said, it was ensuring that the K-8s that are transitioning to K-5, that we provide enough staffing that allows them to have a robust program during that transition. So that might be a year, that might be 3 years.
All right. Well, thanks for going first, and thank you for that. We're gonna switch over to the Willamette group. So if the facilitator and note taker, if you could let us know.
Yep. Hi. So our conversation was very similar, it sounds like. There was definitely support for the schools that were chosen, Lent, Arleta, and Marysville, to feed into Kellogg, and feeling like that was in line with the RESJ lens. Also the consolidation of Spanish DLI programming. There was support for the idea of flexibility for addressing Franklin's enrollment and relieving overcrowding at Bridger. And just a lot of unity around what was good about this proposal. In terms of change, similarly to the first group, there was a lot of concern for Creston and wanting to make sure that however things are worked out, that Creston has the opportunity to participate in a really strong middle school program as well, whether that's at Kellogg or at another school, and thinking about how that could be fixed now, looking at different options for, could we shift something with either DLI programming or another school not feeding to Kellogg in order to fix that? Would that make sense? There was some discussion around whether Lane can be involved in that, but we talked about the fact that it won't be available for a little bit due to the placement of access. There was also some concern for Bridger and wanting to give some choice there in terms of neighborhood and what happens with neighborhood students. There was also discussion about the fact that much of Lent is currently bused, and wondering about just busing for students and how that would impact DLI students going to Kellogg. And then we were talking a lot around things that are current challenges or things that we might want to change that also may feed into priorities for phase 2. And a lot of that centers around Creston and what's happening with the Creston program. Anybody else want to jump in on anything that I missed?
All right. Thank you, Willamette Group. That was a great and robust report out. Let's go to the Columbia Group. If we get Shanice to report out.
Really good discussion and similar themes. I shared the report out was looking different, so sorry everyone. But I think the supports kind of areas that folks are feeling in alignment with Marysville and Lent feeding to Kellogg, Spanish DLI, being at Kellogg, being a positive opportunity for students, and leaving the opportunity to enroll Harrison Park students. But I think overall, the ability to alleviate crowding that Bridger is experiencing, in addition to this opportunity for 8th graders building relationships with students with other strands before high school. And so those were some areas of discussion and didn't land concretely, and Kathleen can check me if I'm wrong here, on any changes, but there are some questions that folks were grappling with. Should Tabor's Spanish DLI program move? What are the impacts if a single strand is left? What are the impacts of students moving twice? So I think those questions were at the forefront, especially the number of Spanish DLI strands at Kellogg potentially, and that impact, right, to other feeders. So no, I didn't exactly share changes, but those were what we were chewing on. And in terms of adding to phase 2, I think there are a number of things identified, like making sure our buildings are right-sized and really being able to accommodate Bridger's 6th through 8th grade students at Harrison Park. Also a question around Creston and having Creston 6th through 8th grade students, having an option added in the next academic year. So that was a question. In addition to many things, the location for 6th, 8th, Mandarin DLI in phase 2, Buckman feeding to Da Vinci, and thinking about space at Lane. And so I think those are the higher level things, and Kathleen May Keller things that I missed. That is all.
The only thing I would add is again, the concern about right sizing our elementary schools that are smaller, which Shanice mentioned. I assumed originally people were thinking about electives, but there were parents actually thinking about interventions that are being offered to students that schools are able to offer based on having a certain number of students and a certain amount of FTE. So I just wanted to make sure that that was recognized. And then also, as we're doing our planning for phase 2, is just making sure that the decisions that we're making don't have a negative long-term impact on Harrison Park as we move into that planning. Did I miss anything? Anyone else from our group?
That's great. Thank you. So I want to be really transparent about what we're going to do next. As you all go on your break, some of the staff and I are going to sort of look at our notes that we just took, our furious notes that we were taking as your facilitators are reporting out, as well as your Jamboards and your other work. And we're going to come back we're going to try to get you back here at 8:05 so that we can, I believe that's right. Yes. We're going to come back at 8:15. So we actually, you get a almost like a 15-minute break. Why don't we come back at 8:10? Sorry. At 8:10, you'll have a 10-minute break. We're going to go ahead and go into these, into reviewing these. What we are going to come back to is that we're going to try to summarize some specific changes and see if there are some changes that we can propose to the recommendation and get to some iterating around that. So we're going to come back with some options for changes. We'll do FIST to 5, and then we'll sort of move forward on a decision about the final recommendation. We'll also have a pretty detailed conversation about phase 2. So while you're at your break, I want to encourage you to kind of think about how some of the things that were surfaced in the things that you want to change, how they might coalesce into some options for some discrete changes to that recommendation. And we'll come back and we'll have that summarized for you, and look forward to our next half of the meeting with you. So we'll see you all back here at 8:10. Well, what seemed like maybe took you a long time went really fast for us in the breakout room. We wanted to sort of synthesize the information that happened. And so what we're going to do, if we could go to the next slide. Actually, if we go to slide 19, please. Thank you. Okay, so while you were at break, we tried to synthesize some of the changes. And so what we'd like to do before we go into the consensus approach, we'd like to present 3 options around a solution for Creston, take a vote on those options, and then move into consensus. So based on the feedback that we heard from the discussions and the notes that were taken in each of your discussion rooms, it seems like a change that we need to do that we can happen regardless is that PPS staff are going to have to do some deep work with the neighborhood strand at Bridger for any of the 2021-22 solutions. And so we wanted to make sure that that's an emphasis and that will happen regardless of, we propose that go into the option C as a change. But as far as Creston is concerned, we have 3 options that we heard, and we wanted to have folks take a look at these options and then sort of ask everyone if they could do a vote on which one is their preferred. And then we'll move into that to then decide about the final recommendation. So the first option, we heard that Creston would become a K5 in 2021. This would mean that it would be added to Kellogg in 2021, along with all of the other recommended changes. this would take utilization at Kellogg up to 99%, which, given all of the other potential outcomes that could happen, this means that likely on opening, Kellogg would be overutilized. So that's option one. Option two for Creston is that we take the recommendation that there are programmatic supports for Creston 6 through 8, and most of those are included much more robust elective options in 2021, but then Creston would become a K5 in 2022, 2023. So that's the second option. The third option would be that Creston goes to a 6-8. Creston becomes a K5 in 2021, and 6 through 8 would go to Kellogg in 2021-22. That would mean that Mount Tabor Spanish DLI would stay at Mount Tabor for 21-22 in order to ease some of the utilization at Kellogg, which would keep Kellogg's utilization at 80.3%, give or take. And middle school Spanish DLI would not be united at Kellogg in 2021-22, but in phase 2, we could think about some additional ways to sort of think about that eventual consolidation or not, and also contend with some of the other utilization issues. So those are the three options. What we're proposing is that these changes would go into the larger recommendation that there seem to be some pretty, in both the notes and in the report out, seem to be some pretty consistent support for some key elements in these. But there was consistency in wanting to address some of the changes at Creston. So, does anyone have any questions about these options? Questions for clarification?
I have a question. Are we doing this just one proposed change, or are we going to be seeing more? Because it feels like this is very linked towards Creston, but there are many others that this could be looked at for.
So right from what we saw from the notes and from the report out, this is the only set of changes that would be focused on Creston. I think we also said that Bridger would be part of this as well, regardless of whichever option for Creston. And some of the other proposed changes could be achieved in phase 2.
I'd like to ask about, is there going to be any talk about funding for the under-enrolled K5s who are changing to K5s from K8s?
I think we could, we didn't.
Oh, Danny, last time we met, that question was posed, and I put a response in that our staffing committee is already aware of these concerns, and as they are waiting for the outcomes of this process in order to identify what would be needed, and that they are committed to making sure that the specials are there, that the standard specials are available at the elementary schools, the K5s. So before the boundary changes, they understand there's a year's transition. And so the staffing committee is well aware, and they're looking at that as we go through our budget process in the spring.
I have a question about,
oh, go ahead, Andrew, sorry.
One in option 3. They seem the same to me in terms of that they end up at 99% when if Mount Tabor's DLI is eventually moved to Kellogg. So either they're exactly the same proposal with a year delay on Tabor moving to Creston, or they're or we're saying that having all those Spanish immersion programs in one place is not as important as I think everyone thought it was, and that to leave a single strand of Spanish immersion by itself is okay, which is, I don't think that's what we've been hearing.
I would say that yes to that, with also another option of that we're also saying that with more guidance and more information that we could, if the emphasis is on wanting to make sure that we're moving towards K8, moving away from K-8s and sort of having the middle school focus, that this gives us additional time for planning to resolve some of the other issues.
But I guess I don't see that happening without moving a strand of DLI out of Kellogg or the strand from Tabor to Kellogg, which would then put it at, I think that's 99% what you guys have over there for option 1.
That, I would say that's one eventuality. I also would say we would leave it open to, we might come up with another creative response.
Just related point on option 1. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, based on the table in the deck, the 99% would assume in option 1 the Bridger all the Bridger neighborhood there. So is that intended? Because I think without it, it's more like 90%.
Jed, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, you're right, Andy. You would pull out those Bridger.
I'm sorry, Sabrina, I cut you off.
No.
Okay, sorry.
In our group, we were saying the same topic as what Andy is addressing, and that was my question. Is in option number 1, we had heard in our group that it would bump Kellogg up to 92% utilization if Creston went there. So is it the Bridger piece that's
yes.
the difference?
Yeah, sorry to clarify that. You both are catching it. Yeah, that was just quick math grabbed off the slide. You're right that it's in the lower 90s.
Okay, just wanted to make sure everyone was working from the.
Can I ask that the slide be changed to 92% so there's no confusion? Thank you.
And it looks like if you used the estimate of 95 Bridger Spanish immersion students, that includes when they have all 3 grades at 2 strands, then it might be even a little different than that.
I have a question about option 2. It states robust elective options, but as I believe Kathleen brought up, one of the big issues is also around interventions, not just electives. And I know in the past, when K-8s have been allocated extra FTE for electives, it wasn't allowed to be used for interventions.
So you're talking about like services, and yeah, we can add more robust elective options and academic and social emotional interventions. Would you take that friendly amendment?
Yeah.
Danny, when in our group, Alexandra and I both representing neighborhood schools, that was our big concern that we expressed, was that we were worried we were going to lose our EAs and, you know, our other interventionists that we have. And so I am in support of this amendment.
Thank you. I believe if Nathan refreshes the presentation, you'll see that I just typed that in. Magic.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other? Oh, sorry. Yes, Sabrina.
Sorry, I was saying in my group that I was a principal when Vestal went through this exact same thing. And I just want to be honest and clear that it doesn't matter how many adults you have. You can't have a really robust situation if you're only talking about 57 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, or what we had 22 7th graders. That you can have lots of options, but you don't have enough kids to make it robust. The kids it's not just having the staff, it's having enough kids. So
yeah.
I just want to be honest, realistic about you could dump a lot of staffing for a year, which I don't think, that has its own issues, but you can't just make up a robust situation when there aren't enough students.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions for clarification about these options or any other friendly amendments? Marissa?
Well, I think we also need to be clear about the fact that if with option 1 or 3, we're not going to tell Creston students that they go to Kellogg for 1 year and then make a change. This is a long-term decision, let's be honest. So that eliminates, like we've talked about before, all of these other options for Franklin High School and makes a real big problem for enrollment at Franklin. So there's a lot more decision making that results from all this, and I think we've spent a long time talking about it. So I'm kind of confused about how this is suddenly coming up in this new poll right now.
I would hope that if that 3 got consensus or seemed to get consensus, we would have a further discussion about it. I agree, but maybe, yeah.
So we are going to add the 4th option of no change.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. So I think what we wanted to do was to sort of understand kind of where we were on the proposal, get a sense of the proposed changes, what could be potentially workable, and then ask you all if you wanted to iterate away from the current proposal, which was option C, to add these there. I think it's important to note that in addition to the implications, I think our conversation about what becomes a priority for phase 2 will need to have some discussion. But the other thing is that the implications for the consensus about the proposal, we're going to have a little bit more conversation. So we do want to, for the sake of trying to get to some consensus about the overall proposal, is to sort of take a moment and do a pulse check around these 3 potential changes. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a poll, and you can vote for one of the 3. We can't do option 1 and option 3 at the same time. So these are all mutually exclusive changes. So, so you can either choose option 1, option 2, option 3, or no change. Voting for any of the options 1 through 3 means that this would be added into the proposal that we had before. So I guess what I would ask you to do is to reflect on what you heard in terms of where there was support, reflect on where you heard, not only in your discussion, but other groups around the implications for phase 2. I think everyone has been doing really higher ordered thinking around what can we really decouple from phase 2. Where can we make some pretty impactful decisions that are almost that can be sort of untethered from other decisions here. So ask you to be, I think Marisa made a good point as we were sort of talking about this. Sort of think about that. You can always vote for, as presented.
Well, Danny, I think that
to do. I'm sorry. Did you?
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I think this is kind of just splitting the vote, because
I was wondering about that
everyone who wants to have more robust elective options. So I don't see a difference between 2. I don't see the need to add this 4. I think we should just be, that's basically like 2.
Yeah, I don't think there's any.
Or we should interpret the combination of 2 and 4 as.
There's nothing in the proposal that would eliminate option 2, whereas the proposal as is would eliminate option 1 or 3.
That's right. So we could sort of pull.
Can I mention something? Just what? Oh, sorry, Danny, if you want to finish. Yeah, go ahead.
Mind if I just finish this one thing? Yeah. So I think what I heard from the conversation is to see how we said that PPS staff is going to work with Bridger for 21-22, kind of just pull option 2 as that bullet point as well. Do I hear agreement for that?
Creston?
For the Creston option 2.
Repeat that.
So you're saying don't assume that in any of the other options?
Assume that we would do it. Assume that we would do that if there's no change.
Yeah, I guess my point is let's just make sure that if we're only voting for 1, that we are clear that anyone who voted for option 2 and 4 presumably is suggesting not option 1 or 3 a change.
That's correct.
Theaters. Okay.
Okay, so we'll just leave it there. Okay, Min, I'm sorry.
Danny, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there was a question that was submitted to the host about what is the Mount Tabor's utilization. Right now it's at 106%.
In option 3.
No, right now this year. They're crowded.
And that means it would stay at that level in option 3 as well.
I'm sorry, Min. Can you start again?
Sure. Yeah. That's all right. So I think this is kind of to Marisa's point, but I just wanted to mention that it sounds like there is some kind of thinking that if the feeder in, like, if the school fits to Kellogg, it's going to be locked into Franklin. And I think during our group discussion, I just asked about that. And Julie did mention that although it is trying to reduce that possibility of split feeder, but it doesn't mean it's a rule. Like if you go into Kellogg, and that means you're definitely going to go to Franklin. So that could still happen. You fit in there and you can still, I mean, it depends on phase 2, I guess, discussion.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Other questions? I'd like us to get to the vote on this one. Again, you are voting on these options. This would mean a change to the current proposal. So I think Nathan has a poll for us. And if you'll recall, option 2 is really no change, but making sure that we have those like programmatic supports in there. So that would be part of the recommendation in addition to it. So go ahead, and if we could have people vote, we'll give you a couple of 2 minutes to vote. And as you vote, I just want to thank everyone for being so flexible. We are trying to iterate in the moment. So I appreciate all of the good thinking and all of the questions, and sort of people really thinking through sort of like what the impacts of this is. So you continue to be just a really thoughtful group. And so I'm really thankful for that. Give you about another 45 seconds, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at the results and then move into consensus building. Nathan, can you give me a count of how many people have voted?
Yes, we have a 92%.
Great. Let's go ahead and see the results. Okay. So it looks like it's pretty clear that we're going to go with option 2. I want to just encourage people to think about those other 2 options as we think about priorities for phase 2, and make sure that we're continuing to take that through. So what we're going to be doing now is that we're going to move into consensus building for the approach overall. So we're talking about option C. And so if we can go to the next slide and go ahead and close out of the poll results. What we're going to do is we're going to assume 2 additional things to option C. We're going to, in addition to what's already in your packets, we're going to include the strong recommendation that PPS staff work with the Bridger neighborhood strand for any solution that gets selected in 21-22. We're going to include the emphasis on the need for programmatic supports for Creston 6 through 8, the middle school portion, in both electives as well as academic and social emotional interventions. So when you are voting on your fist to 5 for consensus around this option, it's inclusive of those 2 additional changes. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you to think about all of the option C plus those changes, ask you to kind of reflect on the conversation that you heard, think about where you heard support, think about the implications for racial equity and social justice, think about what can be decoupled from phase 1 and where we really need to kind of dig into phase 2. And we'd like to take the pulse of the group right now and get a sense if we can move to consensus on a recommendation for Deputy Superintendent Hertz and for our boards to submit to our Board of Education. So what I'd like to do, I think the fabulous Nathan is going to bring up another poll. We're going to ask you to, reflecting on all of that, thinking about this recommendation, are you a 5? That means that you love this and that you're going to champion this. A 4 is, I'm fine. This is great. I'm fine with it as it is. A 3 is, there's still some minor issues that we can resolve later. And clearly we've started to outline some of those, but still moving towards consensus with that 3. Once we get down to a 2, you're seeing some minor issues, but they do need to be resolved now. And then a 1 and a 0, we're seeing major issues and no way I'll block this. So in your voting, we'd like you to identify if you are a 0 or a 1, if you could identify, that would be fantastic, so that we can ask you what still needs to be resolved. If we are having a lot of 0s and 1s, we may have to move into majority vote, but I think it's our intent to try to get to more of a consensus approach here. So I think we're going to pull up the next poll. And if you do vote as a 0 or a 1, just know that I'm going to ask some questions. So please be ready to do that. So if you could go ahead and fill out FISTA 5, and then Nathan, if you could let us know when we hit above the 90s, that'd be great. And we'll close out the poll. Continue to reflect. If you haven't had a chance to vote, go ahead and vote. Hopefully we can take a look.
We have a 94% so far. Actually, we have 100%.
100%, fantastic. I think that's cause for celebration there. I love voter turnout. All right. So I'd like to maybe ask one of my fabulous colleagues to help formulate the next slide with the results while we still have them up there. If we look at the poll results, it looks like we have a good 8% who are champions. It looks like we have 29% who are in that category of 4. It's fine. Looks like we have the greatest number of folks who are at 55%. So if we add, David Roy is going to make fun of me, but if we add 55 and 29 and 8, that gets us to well over 80% of folks who are there. It gets us to, in fact, 92% of support. We did have 5% of folks who said, I see some minor issues we need to resolve now. And then we also had 3% of some folks who said, no way, I'll block this. So just looking at the majority, it does look like we have consensus on moving forward. What I'd like to do now is give the 3% of folks, if they could identify and let us know where the issues are in terms of trying to block. This is something that we're all going to be taking notes on because we do want to try to get as much consensus as possible. And maybe we might be able to, if not tonight, resolve something, but in the coming weeks, try to resolve this. So is there someone who'd like to share who voted for a 0?
Yeah, I'll share. I'm guessing that probably was just me because 3% turned out last week because it was just just one. But I voted a 0 for this because I don't feel like just saying that we're going to ask PPS to provide additional support to a school is really addressing the problem. Someone noted that providing additional teachers and funding doesn't fix the problem. It just means when we have facilities that don't support our students and we don't have enough students to actually support the need, that doesn't help. It's not about the resources, it's about what the students need, and we have, and we can't get that. I also don't support this because it leaves Creston completely in limbo. There's not enough room in Hosford, there won't be enough room in Kellogg, so does Creston stay at K8 or do we move to Lane? This is an unfair process, and I would ask that my name be put on this in opposition because this is not an equitable process. And Danny, I would also say that to ask people to speak up is not appropriate. I think we should allow space for people to either put in the chat or to address in a different way if they don't agree with this process. Thank you.
Can I also add something? I actually have not voted for this one, so I don't know why there's 100%. But if I did, I would go with Beth and block this as well. I mean, for the same reason, not having a solution for Kristen.
So I'm a little bit concerned that we didn't get your vote in there, Min. So we'll sort of look to Nathan and folks to see how we can resolve that, and we'll get back to you. To both Beth and
Amy Kleiner, I didn't vote either, but I texted Stephen because I ethically just couldn't vote because I have a lot of things burning and I'm listening, but it just didn't feel right. Like I didn't have enough information. So I just want to say for the record, I didn't vote either. So
all right, thank you for letting us know. To Beth and to Min, I just want to thank you for throughout the process, sort of holding our feet to the fire on sort of ways that we can improve the process. I do really appreciate how much commitment you have to your school communities. And I do want us to kind of continue to think about how to improve this process, how to make sure that your needs are being met. I want to just really appreciate the way that in which that you've participated and the integrity that you've had throughout this whole process. So I really want you to know how much I appreciate that. So I think that where we are is that there is quite a bit of work to be done. We have a pretty large consensus around an option and a recommendation that still needs quite a bit of work on it. I would say most folks see that there are still issues that need to be resolved. But this is something that in terms of timing, we can start to move to be able to support the reopening of Kellogg. So what we're going to do next is have a little bit more conversation about what's coming in phase 2. Deputy Superintendent Hertz, Claire, is going to tell us a little bit about phase 2. And I just want to reiterate to Beth that we heard what you said about the needs, and I think we all want to be student-centered and make sure that we're meeting the needs of our students. And so I think in phase 2, we want to make sure that we're really paying special attention to that feeling of limbo and doing whatever we can to mitigate against that. So thank you for your comments, and I'm going to turn it over to Claire.
If we go to you've already gone to the next slide. Thank you. First of all, I want to just speak to the parent volunteers that spent so much time analyzing, having dialogue, conversation, preparing a lot of data and a lot of separating out questions and ideas, and just being able to make it so the outstanding issues and all the different pieces that they brought forward were really clear what if you make this decision on phase 1, and it would bring forward the implications for phase 2. So having parents spend all that time and really being selfless, not looking at their own school, but really looking at how do we keep this where we get Kellogg open and we keep it open enough for phase 2 where we have everyone together to finish it. So really appreciate all that fine work, because it's come to almost, not quite consensus, but certainly we have quite a few that are ready to move forward with this. And so I really want to appreciate all of the Southeast Guiding Coalition with all of the hours they put in and into this process. It's been a lot of work, and I'm pleased with what we're able to bring out tonight. So moving into phase 2, we will look to meet in mid to late February, and we will expand to include Southeast schools, and we may have some schools on the Northeast border. And we are going to really work with principals, especially in the schools where we don't have representation, for making sure we have BIPOC representation that's more in line with our student representation, mirroring that demographics, and really increase the student voice. I have met with the students, and increasing the student voice may not mean more members on the Guiding Coalition, but they have some ideas on how we can increase student voice. So working with those that have been involved in doing that. And then just know that we will be debriefing and including some ways for us to share feedback on the process. For phase 2, we'll make sure that there's a good Discord discussion going on, as well as focus groups in January. Okay, so we will have time to really make sure we've captured everything that we've learned from this process and get that into our notes as we plan for phase 2. And with that, I want to introduce our Vice Chair, Scott Bailey, and I'll go on to the next slide.
Claire, I'm sorry, I have a question. I was told at the beginning of phase 1 that for translation of documents to occur, it needed to be requested. So can I give a request? How do I put in a request for materials to be translated after every single meeting in all the languages that are necessary for PPS, rather than waiting until the very end to make sure everyone has access to all materials at all times?
So I am taking your feedback here right now, and we will be certainly looking at, you are not the only person that has talked about translating of materials, and certainly we're looking into what is possible for the phase 2, and certainly we'll have that conversation as we're planning. But I hear your request. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Vice Chair Scott Bailey.
Good evening, everybody. It's just want to first again thank you for the many hours that all of you have put in. I know it's been incredibly hard work. I appreciate the work to get down to, again, not consensus, some very clear concerns from the Creston community, hearing that. But a proposal many of you can live with, noting that there are, and a few can champion, noting that there are still some important details to be worked out. So the next steps from here is on January 12th, the board will have a, I think it's technically a work session to discuss what you sent to us. We will likely have questions and or concerns that we will feed back to you on the 14th, but who knows? Maybe we'll look at it and say, this is good. And then on the 26th, we're scheduled to make a final decision based on your recommendation. Wow. So this is I think a big step forward, and again, an issue that I've been working on for 10 years. So I feel pretty good that you've done the hard work to get us to this point. I don't know what to say. I'm tired. I think all of you are tired. Let's get this meeting over with and you can all go home.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bailey. Next slide, please.
Please remember to complete your feedback form and send the information you have to us. We also will continue to look for the different avenues that you've used in the past to communicate with us. So via email and any other forums, Discord is another option. Thank you again for your participation in this process. It has been exciting. It has been interesting. It's had a lot of twists and turns. But at the end of the day, I just want to commend all of you for an excellent, excellent participation and an outcome that we all believe we can live with. Have a great night, stay safe, and compliments of the season.